called on Congress to pass the George Floyd bill. President Biden did, Vice President Harris did the same last night, said it's a key priority. Why should people have confidence that President Biden will be able to win over Republican support for the George Floyd bill when he hasn't been able to do so on his other legislative priorities?
Like the American Rescue Plan that he passed into law?
He didn't get Republican support for that.
He didn't, but he certainly has support from the American people, and about 80% of it's more than 70% of the American people. I will say, Kristen, that look, the president doesn't believe that he alone can pull the George Floyd Policing Act across the finish line. That is going to be up to Congress. And right now, there are negotiations that are happening. There are leaders on both sides that are having those discussions. The president obviously advocated, as you alluded to, last night in remarks he delivered after the verdict. And we are also have been advocating, our senior leadership has been advocating for this on the Hill, including in direct conversations with members. We're in close touch with the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senate leadership, who are working towards this goal. This encompasses many offices in the White House, including, of course, the president talked about this quite a bit during his meeting with the CBC last week, but also our legislative affairs team, our public engagement team, the Department of the Domestic Policy Council, and their leaders are deeply engaged. And we're also in regular contact with the nation's civil rights leaders who are also advocating for this. But I will also say that there are times, and this is true in diplomacy, but also true in legislating, that we need the best strategy is to provide the space for those conversations to happen privately. And that's part of our objective.
I understand you're citing the fact that public polling showed there was bipartisan support for ARP, but in order to get the George Floyd bill passed, you need 60 votes. So I guess the question is, why should people have faith that the president will be able to get 60 votes to get the George Floyd bill passed?
Well, I think what I was trying to convey, but let me try again, is that the president alone cannot pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act into law.
How does he see his role in getting the George Floyd bill passed?
Well, his role is to work with leaders in Congress, as he has, being in touch with leaders in Congress in the Senate and House, also having a discussion with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, many of whom are playing important and prominent roles in getting this legislation across the finish line. He's also asked members of his senior team, whether it's the legislative team, the Domestic Policy Council, his Office of Public Engagement, to work with outside organizations, civil rights leaders, and others to work together to put pressure on Congress to move forward. He used the opportunity last night to deliver remarks, and I will say, as he's thinking about what his joint session speech looks like next week, he has every intention of using that as an opportunity to elevate this issue and talk about the importance of putting police reform measures in place.
As you know, one of the key sticking points is that qualified immunity provision. Is the president willing to compromise on qualified immunity? Would he back a bill that didn't include qualified immunity?
Well, again, I think the stage we're in now is that leaders on the Hill need to have discussions among themselves about where they can find agreement. And often those discussions, just like it is the case in diplomacy, the best strategy, the most effective strategy is to allow for space for those conversations to happen privately. Once they come to agreement, and we're certainly hopeful they'll do that, we'll have to take a look at what that looks like. Oh, go ahead. Kristen.
Jen, just to follow up from the other Kristen's line of questioning.
Sure. Kristen's in the front row.
I know. We were laughing about that. When President Biden spoke with George Floyd's family yesterday, he promised that he would do everything he could to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed. So would that potentially include supporting getting rid of the filibuster if he can't get the 60 votes needed to pass the Senate?
The president's view remains the same, which is that he believes there should be support from Democrats and Republicans to put in place common sense, long overdue measures to reform our police and justice system. And he believes rebuilding trust among communities is something that Democrats and Republicans should support. There are conversations that are happening now that involve Democrats and Republicans, and he wants to leave the space for that. So he doesn't believe that having a discussion about the filibuster is constructive to that at this point.